Hello, this is Victor Davis Hanson, and this is the Victor Davis Hanson in His Own Word show. We're at the Daily Signal. You can pick us up there at the Daily Signal. We have a YouTube presence, VD Hanson at X, and you can get everything at Victor Hanson, Hanson, all one word, .com, where our podcast, both the 4 I do a day for the Daily Signal, the shorts, and then our weekly ones we do with Sammy Wink and Jack Fowler. Today I'm doing one of our interviews solo, and my guest, I think you all know him, Raymond Ibrahim, and he's going to talk about the swords, the 2 swords of Christ. And I should say before we start, Ray, how long have we known each other? 30? What year did you enroll in Cal State Fresno?
Yeah, we've known each other. I know I met you in 1998.
That was your first year at Cal State?
No, I think I was there in 97, but I think the first semester, like the second semester is when we met. Yes. I had several classes with you. So that would put us, since we're almost at 2026, that's 18 years. I mean, I'm sorry, 28 years.
28 years. Ray was a master's student in Greek and Latin at Cal State Fresno when I met him, and he wrote his thesis with me. And then you came to prominence with was the Al-Qaeda Reader your first book?
Yeah, my first book came out in 2005, not soon after leaving college. I was at the Library of Congress working there.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that in a couple of minutes? How did you find this and what was it?
Sure. So I was at the Library of Congress working in the Arabic division with Arabic sources.
You were in graduate school at that time?
I had just graduated from Fresno, and I went on to Georgetown University. I was at the Center of Contemporary Arab Studies. And, I didn't understand the political dimension of all that at the time. And but I did well in grades. I got A's and whatnot. And I landed an internship at the Library of Congress. And then that became a full-time job. And then sometime around 2005, I came across writings by Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri, the Al-Qaeda leaders.
How did you find it? Where did you find it?
In the Library of Congress, right where I worked, because as only employees...
Well, tell me how you do it. Where was it? What was it doing?
Only employees have access to the stacks, and these are humongous stacks, of course, Library of Congress, and there's tons of bins. And as part of my cataloging, that was part of my job, but I would also peruse through books anyway, just for fun. And I came across these writings by Osama bin Laden, which were in Arabic. I investigated it and found out that even though the media was, of course, very interested in Al-Qaeda and disseminating their communiques to the West, nobody knew about these. And then, as you recall, I mentioned it to you, and you connected me with your agent, literary representative. And
yes, and then Glenn Hartley published it with Doubleday.
With Doubleday. We got a book deal with Doubleday, and it came out in 2007.
Yeah, and I think I wrote the preface to our introduction. And what were the circumstances? He wrote it, and someone in Egypt had published it, and the library got a hold of it?
Yeah, there was some kinds of issues going on, but he had written these back, a lot of them, Osama had written them in the 80s, and it was part of the Mujahideen Afghanistan base that he was part of. But then later writings from him, these were books that were compilations of writings. And so one part would be Osama bin Laden, one would be Ayman Zawahiri, one would be people no one even recognizes. And what I just found significant is that up until then, the messages that we were being fed by the media from Osama bin Laden was the reciprocal treatment business, which is that we're attacking you because you attacked us, you started it, we're innocent, you're the attackers, the whole 9 yards, the grievance mantra. But what was significant about the writings that I found, which were being shared only with Arab speakers and Muslims, was they actually sounded now more like ISIS. And they were basically saying, no, the war is actually transcendent. It has nothing to do with finite political grievances. This is about jihad. This is about Islam against infidelity or kufr, and et cetera, et cetera. So that was the whole significance and point of the Al-Qaeda Reader, was to show the two.
You found the Arab text, right?
Yeah.
You translate it. Was it written in colloquially Arabic, or was it more of a formalistic Arabic?
No. It was the formal standard Arabic. Quranic Arabic. Formal standard Arabic is really based on Quranic Arabic, so Islamists are especially apt at that.
So then after that, you wrote a series of books that, not all of them, but four more, as I recall, and they all focused on the intersection, if I could use that academic word, or the collision of the Christian world and the Islamic world. And you had a unique perspective because your parents were Coptic Christian immigrants. Is that right? From Cairo, right? Or did they live in Cairo?
My father was from Cairo. My mother was from Alexandria.
And you still have relatives in Egypt, huh?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
The next book that after it was Crucified Again, which the subtitle is Exposing Islam's New War on Christians, and that is the one that deals with the contemporary modern day Muslim persecution of Christians, which the media completely ignores, and which, as you indicate, I have a personal interest to due to my own ethnic background, being Coptic and whatnot, and my own familial contacts. So that was that book. And then later on, actually, I started gravitating back towards my academic interests from our days. And yes. I think the next most popular, the most popular book at that point was Sword and Scimitar, 14 Centuries of War Between Islam and the West, which came out in 2018. And that was really a continuation of my master's thesis, which I wrote under your direction. Chapter 1 was the Battle of Yarmouk, which was my master's thesis, but I reworked it. And also, I was thinking the other day, one of the decisive battles in Sword and Scimitars is the Battle of Manzikert, and that reminds me of how our mutual friend James and I actually did a presentation on that battle in one of your classes.
Yes, Ray is referring to a student that I had, and he was a colleague of Ray, a Greek and Latin student, and I think in many ways he was a certified genius as far as languages go. He was absolutely a brilliant student, very eccentric, loner. I'm being euphemistic. And then he went to graduate school in Penn State. And then I lost track of James. That was too bad because he was a very interesting guy and he was absolutely brilliant. But you've kept up with him, haven't you?
Yeah. We haven't probably spoken in a year, but I have his contact info, and I'll probably be in touch with him soon. But yeah, the way you describe him is very apt, and you'll be pleased to know he hasn't changed in any significant way.
Except age. We're all getting older. So let's go to the new book title, and give me a brief. All of our readers want to have a brief. Just what's it about?
Sure, Victor. So it's called The Two Swords of Christ, and the subtitle is The Five Centuries of War Between Islam and the Warrior Monks of Christendom. And here it is. And it's basically, I just mentioned Sword and Scimitar, where I looked at the long war between the West and Islam via decisive battles, right? So the Battle of Yarmouk, Manzikert, as I mentioned. And then my the other book between Sword and Scimitar and this, Defenders of the West, I looked at what I call decisive men. So Western warriors who fought against Islam. Most people don't have any idea about these guys, or they don't understand how their actual significance. So anyway, one book was about decisive battles. One was about decisive men. This book is kind of in between. It's really a long history, and it came out to be really a history mostly of the Crusades, because I'm writing about the Templars and the Hospitallers, the two primary military orders. And if you're going to talk about them, you're obviously going to talk about the Crusades, because they were literally the backbone of the Crusades. But it also spills past the Crusades, as you know, the Knights of St. John in Rhodes, and then later in Malta. So really, the book covers from right at the end of the First Crusade, where the Holy Land is now secured under Crusader rule, all the way until the Siege of Malta in 1565. I actually go further. I go until Napoleon basically conquers Malta and evicts the Knights of the Hospital, the Hospitallers. So it's a long history, and I think it's very eye-opening because, like Defenders of the West, it truly underscores heroism. And the reason for the title is a kind of like a two-pronged pun, because it's called The Two Swords of Christ, because I'm referencing the verse in Luke where, Christ tells his disciples, sell your garment and buy a sword. And they say, look, Lord, here are two swords. And he says, that's enough. Now, that has been allegorized into absolute meaninglessness today by Christians. It just means nothing, really. But for a lot of pre-modern and especially medieval Christians, and I quote a lot of them, what it meant is that, Christ was saying there's two forms of swords. One, to fight spiritual forces, which modern day Christians, I think, will agree with. But the other was to fight secular, physical, corporeal forces, evil, humans, right? And
Why
so
don't
that's how
you?
it was preached, and that's what gave rise, and that's what actuated the military orders. Because on the one hand, it's ironic when you look at them, the way they come out in the book, they're so immensely pious. They're essentially monks, but on the other hand, they're so immensely ferocious and militant. So it's kind of a strange fusion that occurred back in that era, and one which, of course, to modern day Christians is wholly anachronistic, if not if not blasphemous, I'm sure. But that's why I think it's very interesting to look at the theological underpinnings, and it goes all the way back to St. Augustine, just war theory. But I also called it the two swords of Christ because I realized quickly that these two military orders were really the ascendant ones, the Templars and the Hospitallers. So my argument is by really believing in the concept of the two swords of Christ, that there's a war against spiritual and physical, they themselves became the two swords of Christ. So as you can see, the pommels, one of the pommels of the two swords is the Templars and one's the Hospitallers. Okay, so yeah, that's it. It's just a long history.
Why don't tell everybody? I think is curious. Make the distinction in the size of the orders chronologically. Do they overlap? Which was first? Which was more prominent? Which was what separates them both in faith or actual performance on the battlefield or their legacy?
Sure. Well, so the Hospitallers are older but kind of newer, so it's hard to explain. But they existed as an order first, and what they were was they were just it was a hospice for pilgrims traveling from Europe to the Holy Land. And they needed, obviously, someone there, a Christian, to provide them with some relief, a place to live, a place to sleep, and oftentimes medical aid. So it was a hospice formed around the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy, where we're, of course, the primary destination for pilgrims, but they were not militant at all. So it's right around maybe 260s or 270 is when this hospital by an Amalfi Italian merchant group actually they laid the foundations of it back then.
This was in 260
so the first
AD.
military group is really the Templars. And right after the First Crusade, after Jerusalem and the Holy Land has been secured, it's obviously still a small island of Christianity in a sea of hostile Islam. And so what would happen is, even though lots of Europeans started going there on pilgrimages, but they would still be attacked and savaged and mauled in really horrific ways. Okay, I mean, just very shocking, atrocious, rated R ways, let's just say. And so eventually something needed to be done, and a small group of knights decided they were going to commit their lives to to becoming monks, essentially, on the one hand, and on the other hand, protecting pilgrims. And that they became the Knights of the Templars because they were giving Baldwin, I think the second, gave them the temple, Al-Aqsa Mosque, but they understood it as Solomon's Temple, and that became their residence. And they were founded around 1119, but they became formally recognized at a major council 10 years later in 1129. And at that point, they really started growing. Now, the Hospitallers were still at this time functioning as a hospice and providing medical aid and relief for pilgrims, but they slowly followed suit and became militarized. And they've fully become militarized right around maybe 1170 or mid 1170s. But it's interesting to see the logic of both groups because they both start off very pious and they become immensely militant, as I was saying, which seems like a strange contradiction. But if you look especially at the case of the Hospitallers, these are people whose entire vows were based on serving our lords the sick. That was actually part of one of their prayers, which is to give their beds to the poor and needy, and etc. And before long, they realized, the best way to serve these pilgrims was, instead of just sitting back and waiting until they get savaged and mauled, as they inevitably did by surrounding Muslims, we will preemptively put a stop to it by actually protecting them and even going on the offensive. And so that's why before long, both groups, in as much as they still maintained their primary duties of protecting pilgrims and serving them via hospices, became in the end more just seen as the ultimate crack troops of Christendom versus Islam.
In Jerusalem, is this the last generation of the Christian domain in Jerusalem before Saladin takes it? When what happened after did they go to the lesser fortresses in the Holy Land?
Oh, you're talking about after when Saladin takes Jerusalem?
Yes.
Yeah, so what I was describing is before that, and they still have Jerusalem and all these other Christian kingdoms. After Jerusalem is taken in 1187 by Saladin, they actually become, even as time goes by and Muslims become stronger, Saladin, post-Saladin, less and less aid comes from Europe, and more secular native Christians, the Franks that had been there for generations, sell or donate their properties and go back to Europe. And so what happens is they really start taking charge. That's why I say they're really the backbone of the Crusades, the Templars and the Hospitallers, especially as the years go by. So after Jerusalem is conquered, most of them, they had a series of castles all over the place and fortifications, which were very important. And in fact, it's well known, and I document this, but without them, they don't get this kind of credit, but without them, the Holy Land would have been lost much, much earlier. So they really, they were the primary reserve group that just kind of kept Saladin. There's all these anecdotes where he was so frustrated with them. This is why, by the way, after the Battle of Hattin in 1187, even though Saladin, the great magnanimous Saladin, is known to ransom, Christians and whatnot, when it came to them, both groups, he said, no, there's no ransom for them. It was either convert to Islam and renounce Christianity or die. And he had something like 300 of them ritually beheaded at the field.
Why did they have such in popular imagination, Ridley Scott, remember Ridley Scott's, I'm just doing it by memory, but Kingdom of Heaven, where they're almost portrayed as buffoonish, aren't they?
That's just par for the course, Victor.
Yeah,
any movie I watch about the Crusades, it's like the more really involved in the crusade and serious and taking the religion, the more buffoonish they appear and comical. And that, and the best one you're mentioning is, you're talking about the Kingdom of Heaven is Reynold, who's this crazy, he's a loose cannon and he's such a hypocrite and he just uses,
I think he played the actor played in Braveheart.
That guy. I don't know his name, but he's like Scottish or Irish.
Yeah.
And kind of rotund, larger fellow. Anyway, I like him. He's a good actor. But if you actually look at the sources, and I talk about it in the book, he actually, the real Reynold, Saladin, when he killed him, because he does kill him, actually offered him Islam or renounce Christ. And Reynold gives this really, heroic speech and basically says, I won't do what you want. And that's when he cuts his head off. That's a little more heroic than the sort of buffoonery that Hollywood.
Ice water or something. He drank ice water. And the other in the Kingdom of Heaven, was it Jeffrey that I'm trying to remember in the film, the other evil person who was married to the
I
queen.
think it's King Guy.
Yeah, and he ended up in Cyprus, I think.
Yeah, he did.
He did, didn't he? He survived.
Yeah.
So, they after the Fourth Crusade, they're attrited and they start to disperse into the Eastern Mediterranean.
No, after the Fourth Crusade, you have the Fifth Crusade, which was almost successful. It's one of the least known, and it's the one that targeted Egypt.
Yes.
They conquered Dalmatia. And then they went to Mansoura by Cairo. But they, there's all kinds of reasons. I have several chapters on the Fifth Crusade. And again, the Templars and the Hospitallers really shine out, especially. Again, and I quote a lot of primary sources to show you how they were seen.
Are the primary sources in Arabic, Latin, Greek, and Old French, or what are they in English?
Yeah, exactly. It's Latin, Old French, Arabic, a little bit of Greek, but most of them I would say in Latin and Old French. William of Tyre's Chronicles, of course, indispensable. The Rothlin Chronicle, the Templar of Tyre, or is that his name? I think the Templar of Tyre, who wasn't a Templar. And these are all eyewitness chronicle sources. The Itinerarium Peregrinorum by an anonymous chronicler who, that's the primary Third Crusade chronicle. So we're lucky to have a plentiful supply of primary sources. And again, a lot of them are from the Muslim Arabic side, and as usual, I like to use both so everyone knows how both. In fact, I conclude the book by quoting from Arabic sources because in many ways, they're the ones who most underscore how they feared the Templars and the Hospitallers. And in a way, it's almost like a begrudging kind of nod of respect that they give to them. They always regularly portray them as their chief thorn, the ultimate problem. They talk about other monks and clergy as being hypocrites. You can buy them off, but not the Templars and the Hospitallers. And these are internal dialogues between Muslim strategists.
I think people forget sometimes because of the contemporary narratives that come out of the Middle East of settler colonialists that you can make the argument that that area of the world, Asia Minor, and then the Middle East as well, was settled by Westerners. You can argue the Ionians were there from the 7th to 8th century BC, but in terms of, there were Persian inroads and occupations in Lydia and then down in the Holy Land, but you can argue that after the Alexandrian conquest of the Persian Empire, that area remained Western and then Roman, or I should say eventually Roman, and then Hellenistic, and then Roman, and then Christian under the Byzantines. And it wasn't lost really to the 7th century AD, was it?
And that's the great irony. Most people today, you mention, MENA, the Middle East and North Africa, and it's in everyone's mind. Of course, it's Muslim, but it's almost always been Muslim, always been Eastern. Okay, when in fact, at the 7th century, during the Islamic conquest, when they first began, right around 636, that was really the heart of the Greco-Roman Christian world.
Yes, it was. That's
think about it. There were five. There's
Augustine
5 C's.
was at Hippo and everything.
Augustine of Hippo, Alexandria, and just from a Christian point of view, you had 5 major C's. Only one was in the West, Rome. That's the one that never got conquered. All the other 4, and they were equally as important. Some arguably were more important in the earlier, like Alexandria especially. These were all conquered and absorbed and swallowed up. So if you look at a map, actually Islam swallowed up literally somewhere between 66 to 75% of the original Christian world. And later, Anatolia, Asia Minor was taken, Turkey. And people are not aware of this. They just think as if really Europe was the final bastion of Christendom. Mm-hmm. It wasn't always, Europe is Christian and, the Middle East is Muslim. It was, people forget that long, painful, traumatic annexation of the majority of the Christian world, which is now Muslim.
Did the 2 orders find their way into Byzantine Constantinople before 1453? Were they traveling through? They weren't based in, did they have the protection of the Byzantine Empire at any point?
Not really. And, to their credit, both orders, and this is good for me. This was a happy coincidence for me because, as I mentioned earlier in the book, I cover the Crusades in detail, but I don't talk about the Fourth Crusade because the book is about these 2 groups and they had nothing to do with the Fourth Crusade because they were localized in the Holy Land. That was their primary interest, which was securing the Holy Land. And they didn't really get involved in all of these literally Byzantine labyrinth kind of machinations and whatnot.
But they were Western Christians rather than Orthodox Byzantines?
Yeah, they were Catholic.
Yes. Yeah. So, and then tell us a little bit how they got into, or these orders established a center in Rhodes and then later in Malta.
All right. Well, and I don't want to give too much away because this is actually, when you read the book, it's almost like a dramatic movie. There's so many ups and downs, but I think everyone knows the part that they get evicted out of the Holy Land. Yeah. The Crusades end right around 1291, and everyone's out, and that's when the Knights of the Hospital eventually land in Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, and that's very interesting.
You can see their hospital there now today.
Yeah. You're familiar with it, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Dragon Slayer.
Yes. Yeah.
And I have a whole chapter on that because that's also interesting. But so they land in Rhodes. And again, it really underscores how dedicated they were to getting the Holy Land. Rhodes, as you can see, is very close to the Middle East, and it's right off, the western coast of Turkey. And they chose it intentionally. It was actually, they landed there and settled it right when the Ottoman Turks were beginning. Their eponymous founder, Ottoman or Osman, was actually a contemporary with the Knights of St. John when they settled Rhodes. And so he even attacked them. But my point is they chose that location because unlike other Christians or Crusaders who wanted the safety, they always put themselves in the most dangerous area so they can provide succor and aid for fellow Christians who are pilgrims, or even more like, they actually became a naval force at this point. So the Knights of St. John, right around the 14th century, when they leave the Holy Land, now they're really a naval force, and they're considered one of the best.
Who are the precursors in the terms of the Templars or the Hospitallers? Who were their
Their founders, kind of?
Yeah. I mean, which strain of these Christian militant orders do they emerge from?
Okay, so the Templars, it was a knight named Hugh of
Yeah.
Pines. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right,
Yeah.
French knight. And he was the one who came up with the idea that we have to create a band of knights to help protect pilgrims when they come to the Holy Land. And initially, something like, according to William of Tyre, for the first decade, there was just 9 knights. And they shared a horse. Two knights shared one horse. That's how impoverished they were. That's why their emblem, one of their emblems, was you see a knight, 2 knights on one horse. That's a reference to that. But they were very much championed by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, and he was a Cistercian. So much of their rule was based on the Cistercian rule, which is sort of fortuitous because it was the most masculine and the most austere of all the rules at the time. So that's what I would say is their background, the Cistercian rule. And the Knights of the Hospital were more, I think they followed the Augustinian rule more. And their founder is, again, it's in the book. There's a story. His name is Gerald of Sasso, and he was the main abbot, I think, working at the hospice during the First Crusade when the Crusaders came and were besieging Jerusalem in 1099. And when they found him, he was being tortured by the Muslims, but they kept him around because he was a hospice worker. So he was serving the Muslim warriors by taking care of their wounds and whatnot. But he became, and he's the thing is, when you look at their lifestyles, these are like saints. They're not, you don't think of them as militant at all. And this is what I think so interesting, because on the one hand, they're just, very pious saints who are crawling on their hands and knees and praying and serving the sick. And then on the other hand, you see just how the degree of militancy that they also had, which again, flies in the face of the movies that we watch all the time. When you watch, cool Viking raiders, and they're always attacking these wimpy, weeping, crying monks who never fight back. Was it? I mean, I'm sure there were instances of that, but it was more often than not. They had a very militant mindset. Which, by the way, it brings an interesting thought. I'd like to hear what you think about it. But going back on this idea of, if you watch these movies, they always show you the Vikings and these pagans are presented kind of cool. They're like us. They don't take religion seriously. They just want to have a good time. But then somehow, they end up becoming Christian. And the Christians are always presented as weak and feeble and, screaming and crying. So my question is, if that was the case, then why did the Vikings become Christian? Because they were actually beaten. Those weak Christians actually beat them on the field of battle, didn't they? I mean, even when you talk about, the Norman conquest, Hardrada was already Christian. But my point is, it doesn't make sense, this Edward Gibbon theory, where, to be a Christianity weakened the pagans, because really some of the most ferocious fighters were the Franks, the Normans, and they were Christian and they were beating the pagans. So what do you think?
I think there were 2 reasons. One was they were very impressed with the Roman legacy. So in terms of writing, aqueducts, roads, architecture, especially the Scandinavians, they did not have that. They were too far on the other side of Germany to have a direct contact with the Western and then later Christian experience. And the other one was, as you know, people talk about Islam as being ecumenical, but Christianity, then once you were converted, then you were as much a Christian as somebody from another nation had been for centuries. So this Christian missionary zeal had said to the Scandinavians and the Vikings, if you can convert, not only will you have exposure to this superior culture that will improve your lives, but more importantly, you're just as important as we are. You're Christians. And
so it puts an end to tribalism, which is good.
Yes, it put an end to tribalism, although there are people who have suggested in Gibbon-esque terms that after their conversion, they were not as ruthless or combative as they had been before.
That's the chivalric culture, right?
Yeah. Yes. If people are interested, Gibbon's Decline and Fall, he makes this argument that it doesn't quite work very well, because he says that they were, I don't want to use, colonized or civilized, or the Sermon on the Mount was not the same as if you want peace, prepare for war, the martial credo of the Romans. But it doesn't really explain, and remember, Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire goes all the way to 1453, so somehow from 470 to 1453, 1 millennium, Christianity in the Greeks, Byzantines never called themselves Byzantine. That's a 19th century word. They were called Romaioi, and they were Christian, and they were very formidable, fierce warriors.
Yeah.
And so that's something to keep in mind. Then we get to Malta when they're expelled from Rhodes.
Yeah, so after they're expelled in Rhodes, I call them the homeless hospitalers.
Yes.
And they're just kind of living on the Mediterranean. And this is also coincides with the high age of Islamic piracy, the Barbary raids, because they get evicted in 1480. So, right around that time, you have the Barbarossa brothers who are, and again, it's just funny to me when you hear the Barbarossa and the piracy thing. It's today now also almost presented almost like in a funny, clownish way. But when you read what these pirates were doing, I mean, they literally were terrorizing all of Europe. It wasn't the sadism involved in the atrocities that they would engage in, biting some guy's throat out and eating his tongue and twisting someone's head until his eyes bulge out. Really graphic stuff. It's also the high age of slavery, like I said. In 1 century, they've estimated, it's a very conservative estimate by an American professor, where it's 1.2 million white slaves just in Barbary were being sold. And this doesn't take into consideration the Ottomans, which was even bigger, the Ottoman slave trade, or the Crimean, the Tatars, which were Muslim, slave trade of basically European flesh. And so one of their chief duties at this point, when they're now in Malta, is to try to defend against these slave raids by the Ottomans, by the Mamluks as well, who are in Egypt.
And people should remember that. There's been a lot of studies on the ethnic background of the harem in Constantinople, and most people believe that half of the people in the harem were from southern Russia or the Black Sea, and they are from Europe, the Balkans. And if you think about it, once the Sultan had his various concubines, but he picked one to produce an heir. Usually the others were liquidated. And then the Sultan was half European. And if you keep doing that again and again and again, people have argued that many of the sultans by the 15th or 16th century were European. And Erdogan, in his arrogance, got very angry when the Greeks said that they not only had been there since the 7th century BC in Asia Minor, but that the Byzantine Empire DNA still existed. So he commissioned 23andMe to run a study of Turkish rural people, and they found out that the vast majority of them had more Greek blood than Turkish.
Yeah, slaves.
Yes, slaves, and then the elite were from the harem as well. And
the issue that you're talking about, this elite thing, it's even worse. It's not that they were half. Actually, there's a Spanish scholar who looked at the Umayyads in Spain.
Yes.
And he determined that the very last caliph had something like only 5% Arab blood and 95% European blood. Because it was, like you say, it was always split in half because they would always mate with Europeans.
There was a scholarly study done maybe 8 or 9 years ago that pointed out that a lot of Ottoman foreign policy, as it was focused on the Balkans, that is not so much conquest but occupation and control. Certain villages were exempt, and he studied these villages. These would be places in Greece, what is now Albania, Turkey, parts of Yugoslavia, and the ones that were treated the best were the homes of the mother of the Sultan over 200 or 300 years. She had that influence because she was captured as a young girl, put in the harem, and then ended up, luckily, as the queen bee, so to speak. Do you have the heroic siege of Malta where they stopped?
Oh, yeah.
And defeated
I think I probably have the
Sultan's
most comprehensive account
wow.
because I went through all the primary sources, and it's something like 40 pages in my book. But there's also, everyone knows about the siege of Malta. It is very heroic, but lesser known and no less heroic is the 1480 siege of Rhodes. And I might have misspoken. I think I said they were evicted in 1480. Actually, in 1480, the largest Ottoman armada came to evict them, and they lost. So they were actually evicted in 1522. from Rhodes by Suleiman the Great. But they
Famagusta
stayed.
was another tragedy too. The siege of Famagusta, where they
Oh,
took
there's a lot, and another
Mark
especially
Antonio.
important is the siege of what's that?
They stuffed him. Remember, with straw. Mark Antonio, the
Oh yeah,
Italian.
you're talking about right before Lepanto.
Yes, right before.
Yeah.
It was sad.
Yeah. That's these are the things that never show up in the Hollywood movies that are intent on always showing how magnanimous the Muslims are.
Yeah, they had been given terms, and then they broke the deal and slaughtered the Venetians.
Yep,
it was horrific. But
the slavery part, though, I think you'll like the slavery part. I think not you, but I think every American will really benefit from looking at the slavery data. Because what else comes out in this book, because I talk a lot about the slavery of Europeans, was that there was unlike the transatlantic slave trade of blacks, which was really cold business. It was, the way it comes off, it's just cold business. The Muslim enslavement of the Europeans had an ideological component to it because you're the enemy, you're the infidel, you're the Christian. So they were always treated in very, very sadistic ways, which comes out in the book. And also, speaking of the black slave trade, whereas blacks in America, and this again, here's a reflection of something today that we can talk about that reflects on the past. So today, America still has a significant black population because they continue to exist. Slavery, the enslavement of black Africans by Muslims and Arabs was even more widespread. But if you look in the DNA,
or 12, it was about 30% larger than the.
Yeah. But if you look at the DNA of those regions, they have zero black blood. And that's because they would castrate them all and oftentimes just kill them. So they never had a chance to assimilate. So this is what I'm saying. Islamic slavery, all slavery is bad, obviously. But the Islamic slavery came with all these different, really sadistic components that most historians overlook.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Raymond Ibrahim, and he is the author of a new book that is coming out. What's the pub date?
It comes out November 25th.
November 25th. You should get it right before Thanksgiving. The Two Swords of Christ. And we'll be right back. And we're back from our sponsors, and we're here with Raymond Ibrahim. And I think because slavery is such a hot-button topic, 1619 Project, people don't even realize the word Slav, slave. It comes from the idea that these are originally white captives from the Balkans who were Slavic, and there were 3 or 4 million of them enslaved by the Ottomans. And some of it's pretty, I don't know, the whole psychology of the Janissaries is kind of sick. Where they would go into a recruitment village and pick out a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, big child and say, we'll only take one of your sons, but he'll have a great career. Then they segregate him and make him into a zealot, Islamic zealot.
If I may elaborate on that, because you're really touching on an important topic. And the worst part isn't even what it was. It's how it's being presented today. So it is what you say, which was basically they'd conquer a subject. And the Janissaries, first of all, were all white. They were all Europeans. That was the case. So they would go, they'd conquer whatever, some Balkan nation. And then they would go and take, like you're saying, the healthiest, the strongest, the handsomest boys. And then they would find what they're good at. If they're big and strong, they would turn them into warriors, Janissaries. If they were just handsome or smart, they would use them as administrators. But they would also go through a systematic Islamic indoctrination process. And they would get them pretty young, okay? So a lot of them would really become Muslims. And then the sick psychology is that, it was a perpetual cycle. So they would radicalize these guys who were originally Christians and then unleash them on their former kin to conquer more land and take, again, so they were literally bleeding them of their best and strongest.
We have some Byzantine sources about that, the shock.
But now, as you know, in the academic sources today, you know how they describe Janissaries? It's like getting a scholarship to Harvard.
No, I mean, there's something, the dervishim, it's something about this recruitment when you're a Balkan peasant and an Islamic army comes in and you see these big European-looking soldiers, and they have a particular distinctive, feather, on their cap and their helmet, everything about them, and they're the best trained and the most equipped, and yet they're one of you. And in some cases, we even have anecdotes where families recognize the Janissaries, and yet they're the most bloodthirsty anti-Christian.
And they were also, here's an interesting point that goes along with one of your theses from way back. They were always infantry. And I think that's because the Ottomans understood that Europeans made for good, decisive shock troops. So there you go, the Western Ottoman way of war.
Yeah, they were sort of the Ottoman SS.
Yeah.
Where does the book end?
It ends. The major ending scene is the Siege of Malta in 1565, and I start it right around the First Crusade, 1100. But I have like a chapter that kind of summarizes what happens all the way until really the present, but mostly with Napoleon's conquest of Malta on his way to Egypt right around 1800.
Tell us, what did Napoleon do with the order when he disbanded it?
It's really funny, the whole thing it just shows you how things had changed, because a lot of, as you know, most of the Crusaders historically, including of the military orders, were Franks, which means they were French. So it's ironic today when you think of France as so secular and all this sort of thing. But they were actually, they created most of the till today. In Arabic, if you say Ifrangi, which means Frankie, it means a white guy. or you can, if you say it about an Arab guy, he's Ifrangi, means he acts white, he acts Western. Okay, so that's the impact that Franks had on. So it's ironic that a Frenchman, this military order, the Knights of St. John, lasted for almost 1,000 years. And it was actually a Frenchman who put an end to them. And he had a Quran in his possession, which he was reading because he was on his way to Egypt and he was trying to diplomatically annex it, which he kind of did. So he didn't kill them. He just basically evicted them. And they continued. They still live till today. The Knights of St. John still exist.
I was giving a lecture, I think it was in Vienna or it was in Geneva, where somebody came up to me and said he was a European aristocrat, and he was from the Order of St. John, and he had this kind of, he opened a little case, and he had a red sash and everything. And
but they've been demilitarized, so their hallmark thing that made them impressive is no longer. They're more, they're involved in charity and earthquake relief, all of which is great, of course.
It's very funny. It's the value of going back. I think all of our listeners and viewers understand is it really puts today's particular views in a larger context. If you look what's going on with Boko Haram in Nigeria, 2 million refugees, 160,000 Christians slaughtered, and you look at the world's attention on the so-called settler colonialist Israelis in Gaza compared to what's going on in the occupation of Nigeria or northern Cyprus, where a whole demographic in 1974 was ethnically cleansed. And I don't know how Islam has been able to achieve this euphemistic, both in vocabulary and the way that we look at it. I guess I don't know if it's out of fright of terrorism or it was the chauvinism came from the power of oil in the 70s and 80s with the boycotts, but people have not applied the same standards of evaluation when you look at so-called genocide, atrocity, occupation, all of these buzzwords that we associate with Israel and the Middle East. It's really shocking.
The worst part for me that I'm noticing, and I haven't heard anyone say this, but it really complements what you're saying, is that there's this weird seesaw between Israel as a nation and Islam as a religion. And it seems to me that for the longest time, it's like an either or exclusive kind of thing, which is if one's bad, one's good. If one's is good, one's bad. And for the longest time, I think the idea was Islam is bad, is violent, it's tolerant, therefore Israel's good. Now, as Israel comes under increasing criticism, all of a sudden Islam is now the good guy. And it's kind of like, okay, what's happening in Israel and the Palestinians, that's a very localized thing. But for some reason now people are just giving a blank pass to Islam anywhere and everywhere. So in Africa with this jihad, in Europe with the migrants, and it's kind of like it's become this weird seesaw. So just because Israel now is under criticism, Islam has been lifted up and it's above reproach. Weird.
I think a lot of it is to do with the 250,000 students in universities from the Middle East here in the United States and in Europe. And then the immigrant population of Germany is 15.5. France is about 9%. And Britain is up to 8 or 9, and even higher in some of the cities. And so you're getting a huge influx of immigrants from the Middle East, and in consensual societies, they vote, and they have a lot of influence. And then there's always the fear of terrorism. We remember the cartoonist in Paris, and we've noticed the writers, Van Gogh, all these people who were threatened for Salman Rushdie. So there was always a sense that a Christian militant, for no matter what the left said about, pro-lifers, they were pretty calm. But there was the idea that there are more and more Islamic peoples in the West now in the last 30 years, and we always have to be careful how we talk, because we can get in, we can have a terrorist incident in a way that will not happen with other groups. And there's a lot of wealth now, petrodollars in the Middle East. Qatar, I think, gave $50 million the last 10 years to universities. Most of the Middle East programs in the elite schools are funded by Middle East petrodollars, mostly from Qatar.
I found that out the hard way when I went to Georgetown.
Yeah, I bet.
They've gotten more money than I think anyone. I think it's last I looked, like, I don't know, 50 million since the early 2000s.
Yeah,
and it
it's a
definitely
wise
colors.
investment.
Yeah, it definitely colors
right next to the Capitol. It's a university. It's
right.
the best university in Washington D.C. and it affects everything, and it affects where I work, and it's hard to speak. Another thing is that the Jewish population in the United States is about 7 million, and the Arab population used to be a fraction of that. It's about 3.5 to 4 million. And by 2030, it's supposed to surpass it. But more importantly, the secularization of the Jewish diaspora in the United States is really almost half of Jews are not observant, and 30 or 40% are not particularly fond of Israel. And that's not true of the Islamic Muslim population. They do not abandon or secularize or intermarry to the same frequency as Jews. So I think we're going to get in a situation very soon that the lobbying in the Middle East is going to flip in the United States. That there's going to be more adherence and more student and political activism on the behalf of Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or Iran than there is Israel. I can already feel it. And that in a democracy, you'll feel that people will make the necessary adjustments in politics. They already have. The Democratic Party, 40% of them support Israel, 40%. And it's almost 72 or 73 in the Republican side. So it's this ancient strife that you're talking about in your series of books, but especially this one. It's very, very relevant today. Excuse me.
That's exactly it. It's the continuity that I've always found eye-opening. People treat what's happening today as if it's its own particular local new development, but it's not, because so for example, going to this point about now that Israel's criticized Islam is good. Well, how do we explain the previous 2,000 years or 14 centuries between Islam and the West when Israel didn't exist and Islam was doing the same exact thing against the West and conquering? And people don't realize that America's very first war as a nation is with the Muslims, not just Muslims, Barbary wars, but when Jefferson and Adams asked them, why are you attacking our vessels and enslaving our people? The ambassador from Barbary said, because our Quran says you're infidels and it's our duty to terrorize and kill and enslave you. He literally said that. And Jefferson wrote it to Congress, and we have the letter. So that's why I just find it interesting, because what's happening today in political developments don't really shed light the way people think they do on Islam's relationship with the West. But as far as your point about the left and Islam, in fact, just last week I looked at a really important report, and it was about the rise of anti-Christian sentiment throughout Europe. And it's also happening in North America as well, attacks on churches especially. And, when you dig into it, you find out, well, who are the two primary culprits behind these attacks on churches? One, it said Islamists, and two, leftists. So you find they're always in bed together, even though on the surface they're so different.
Yeah, it's very funny how on the new binary, that's neo-Marxist binary that I think since Obama, we've divided the country to oppressed, oppressor, victim, victimizer. under that DEI paradigm, it's not just gender and race or ethnicity, it's religion. And somehow, and it has nothing to do with class, because take Mondami, as I pointed out on this show before, he's Indian Americans, that is Americans whose legacy comes from the Indian subcontinent, are the wealthiest immigrant group in the United States. And yet he talks about taxing affluent and white neighborhoods. But my point is that somehow very prosperous young students from the Middle East, fueled by petrodollars, and they're the elite of their society, they get over here and then they become part of the DEI coalition, intersectional, and you can be a middle-class Jewish kid, and then you're demonized as a settler colonialist oppressor. And it has nothing to do with history or class or money or anything. And it's just stunning. And then when you look at the LGBT community and what would happen if any of these people in that coalition were to go back to the Middle East and live there, I can tell you that as somebody who's visited Israel a lot and visited the West Bank and even Gaza, I can tell you that if you were openly LGBTQ with a pride flag and you had a choice between walking on a corner in Tel Aviv or in Ramada, I would say probably Gaza City, Bethlehem, anywhere in the West Bank or Gaza, you would be in dire trouble.
Are you familiar with what happened in Hamtramck, Michigan?
Lately, yes, I was. That's near Dearborn, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know if it's lately, but it really goes to what you're saying, because it finally, the leftist, the LGBT crowd, really supported the Muslim migrant community there in many ways until they became literally the majority. And once they became the majority of the city council, the first thing they did is ban pride. and the LGB people felt so betrayed and upset, and but that to me I think is the modus operandi moving forward for any leftist who wants to
I think
work
so.
with them. Yeah.
I don't think. I mean, I'm not suggesting they're not moderate Muslims, but to be a moderate Muslim in Muslim orthodoxy is not to be a Muslim.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
it doesn't have the liberalizing evolutionary strains and sects that Christianity has.
A moderate Muslim is just an assimilated Muslim who's more American than he is Muslim. You know,
yes,
it's just like he's a nominal Muslim.
That can happen, but not to the same degree as a Christianity. Let's before we go, Ray, if somebody wants to buy the book, you go to Amazon, you can get it. But what's your website so they can go there?
Sure. Thanks, Victor. My website is RaymondIbrahim.com, RaymondIbrahim. And links to all my books to Amazon. But also, if you want to get a signed copy, you can get it through my website. And also, I got my little YouTube channel, which I've been growing. It goes under my name.
And what is that under
Raymond Ibrahim's Holy War channel?
Holy War channel.
It seemed applicable.
I'm surprised you weren't under the previous administration surveilled by the.
Well, I made it afterwards.
the FBI. And what's the publisher? Where they could go?
The publisher of The Two Swords of Christ is Bombardier Post Hill.
Oh, good. Bombardier is a new imprint by Adam Bellow, the son of Saul Bellow, isn't it? He was my editor for 8 books.
Yeah,
he was a very good guy. So he's got his own imprint now, Bombardier Books.
It's, by the way, it's got really. I'm very happy with the not only the maps but the color pictures.
Wow, that's amazing.
There's a lot of nice color pictures in there.
That's a lot of work to get all the pictures and permissions and everything.
So here's there's a Templar charge. There's the 2 knights I was talking about on one horse.
Yes. And you can buy it tomorrow.
No,
tomorrow.
You can buy it now, and you'll probably get it tomorrow.
And are you going to be appearing anywhere, Ray, at book signings? Or I know you're traveling a lot in the next few weeks.
Yeah, not necessarily book signings, but yeah, maybe I'll do one. Maybe I can do a local one.
Yes, you can. And you're on your way to Europe, is that right? Pretty soon?
Yeah. I'm going to Europe. I'm going to be there for a little bit. For a while, possibly.
Where are you going to be?
I'm going to be at the Well, must I say, because people might come try to kill me.
Oh, you don't have to tell you. Yeah, don't.
I'm
I
a
have the
hunted
same.
guy.
Yeah, well, I have people showing up at my house as well.
I know.
Yeah, I've had that problem. As I told my
But you know what? I'll
audience.
say this. It'll be in Hungary, so,
Okay.
which is
I
relatively safe, I guess.
I needed some Knights of Malta when they swatted our home. They called up and said there was an armed intruder, and all these armed sheriffs came. And then I walked into, I won't tell you the branch, I walked in, or the bank, and I was going to take money out. And they said, "We're sorry, Mr. Hanson, you have no savings and you have no checking account." They drained it. So who are they? Who are they, as they say in the Wild Bunch? I don't know who they are, but I can tell you one thing, that they're not on the conservative side.
I've been to your ranch many times, and it looks increasingly like a beleaguered knight in a fortress, surrounded by hordes.
Yeah, well, I had a local law enforcement officer that not too long ago gave me a oral map. I mean, he delivered a little discourse on the incidents of gang violence, murder, theft, assault, and he said, unfortunately for you, the intersection closest to you is the most heavily crime-ridden in my area of southwest Fresno County. And one day, not too long ago, I was driving into town, and all of a sudden, I saw maybe 15 people. Some were ICE, and they did have the mask, but some were DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, some were FBI, and they all had masks. And then they had about 15 people in boxer shorts, and they were all handcuffed with plastic, and they were all sitting there. And it's funny because we didn't know what was going on. You could go on Google, and we were getting things like a person would come and say, "Señor, ¿dónde está la casa de putas?" And I said, "No sé." And there was a house of prostitution on a Google map. But they unfortunately gave the wrong coordinates to our house. So we had everybody showing up in our barnyard. And then we've had one where you could get quote unquote car parts and things like that people have asked me for. Where do I get the car parts?
And where you live was originally settled by Swedes, right?
Well, Kingsburg was my father's family, but this was more people from, but it was considered, if you were one ethnic group in Selma, it was Danish. And this was a Danish town, and Kingsburg was more Swedish. But when I was growing up, all of these houses around me the Fanukis were Italian. We had two Japanese families. We had a Dutch family. We had a person from India, a person from Mexico, and two Armenian families. It was really a natural diversity, and they were all
it's much more homogenous, huh?
Yeah, there's no such thing as diversity, but it's all corporate. So when I walk every night, and it's funny, on my property, what's left of it, it's 40 acres. I'm just a tessera and a mosaic, so I see the tractor of my landlord who owns, I don't know, over 10,000 acres. He's a good guy too, and his tractors just go on one property and then another property, and they're all lined up. So when they get to my little 40 acres, I wave to the tractor. But all the houses that used to be the places where kids were raised, they're all rented out from people. Not all, but a lot illegally, and you should see them. They're not farmhouses anymore. They're compounds. So there's Winnebagos, there's lean-tos, Romex, corrals. There's 30, 40 people living in a compound that once had a family, and nobody knows who they are. I try to keep on good terms. I've had a couple of film crews come here. They've heard about this area. They wanted to film about gang activity and meth and fentanyl, and I said, please do not go to that house, that house, that house, that house, or at least not in my company, because I have to live here. But we do have kind of a ashlar wall, no turrets, but I built it with a good friend of mine, and it's 700 feet. Anyway, it's kind of an isolated. I feel like, not that I'm going to compare myself to August Palestine, but I'm sort of like at the siege of Hippio Regius or something, or maybe the siege of New Carthage. And not the Vandal; those were Vandals, but that was pretty bad.
Do we have time for if I make a quick relevant
Yes.
observation and get your reaction to it?
Yes.
So I've been noticing, a lot of people, people living in the West, Europe, America, and so forth, the majority are still white, European. And so when they see minorities around them, I think they still think of themselves as in having the upper hand. But that's only a microcosmic view, because if you look at the whole world, it seems to me, I think the white population is like 6, 7, 8%.
Yes, I think it's 6%, 7%.
6%. Yeah. So what I'm trying to figure out is, and that's the demographic, that little tiny 6% is the one that's being convinced from cradle to grave that they have to suppress their culture, their religion, their civilization. They have to give up land to the other because they're horrible people. And somehow they still think they're in the majority. But the people who they're giving everything up to, land and territory and conceding, would never, of course, do that if it was, vice versa, and whites went to their country. So I'm just trying to understand, is this a purely suicidal situation
well,
we're watching?
There's a lot of books called The Suicide of the West, obviously.
Literally, right?
Yeah, there's 3 or 4, but or the Dawn and Decadence by Jacques Barzon. I think part of it is the unique nature of Western civilization. It's the only one that's self-critical. When you go back to the plays of Aristophanes or the dry comments of Thucydides or Tacitus in the Roman sphere, Suetonius. Nobody, I can't think of an Islamic author or a Chinese author who would say, we make a desert and call it peace, as is in Tacitus's annals or histories. So I don't see any of that self-criticism. And the West is very self-reflective, the Enlightenment. That's one thing.
And it's being weaponized against it, though.
Yeah, it is. There's a fine line between healthy self-criticism and self-critique and self-loathing, or what one of a great scholar has called oikophobia, hating your own house. Mm-hmm. Or fearful of your own culture. And that's taken root partly because of the emphasis on race. The other thing people forget is Western culture while it was born in Europe, it was a little bit different in the sense that Japanese culture is westernized. It's a strong ally of the United States. It's democratic. South Korea is. So we've had this propensity to be able to incorporate people in the West who were originally either not a part of it or antithetical big ideas. So when the founders said, all men are created equal, they allowed everybody to come to the United States. It wasn't like the Spanish Empire that said you had to be Spanish and Christian to be admitted into Latin America or South America or Southern North America. So it's the problem with that is that I think multiculturalism misinterpreted what the idea was behind America. The idea behind America was you come from all over the world, but you have to surrender your prior identity. And you have to accept a Western and particularly American identity, and you can enrich our culture with your food, your clothing, your music, your art, but you do not dare tamper with the core beliefs. And we have people who are coming here and they know nothing about the history of America, or they know nothing about the Constitution, and they think they can operate on the premises of where they came from. But in a brutal bargain, nobody asked anybody. Nobody asked any of us to come here. We all came here with the idea that it was better than the alternative, and certainly better than our own homeland. And once we get here, we should keep that in mind. I keep going back to this crazy metaphor. I wrote about it in Mexifornia, but I think I had a student, I won't mention his name, he was contemporaneous with you, and he was really brilliant. And one day I saw him burning under that Prop 187 that was going to cut off state support for illegal aliens, and he was burning the American flag, and they all had Mexican flags. So I said to my student, why are you doing this? You're waving the flag under no circumstances you want to go back, and you're burning the one under every circumstance you want to stay. And he said, I don't know, I'm just angry. I said, who are you angry at? And he said, well, they don't want me here. I said, no, they want you here if you're illegal and you get citizenship, but they don't want you to come if you're... He was illegal. So I guess what I'm saying is that we have done a very poor job of saying to immigrants, you're welcome, but you must speak our language, you must be acquainted with our culture, you must assimilate, acculturate, integrate within it. We would welcome your literature and your restaurants, and all that enriches us, but don't dare try to change our constitutional system and our Western legacy. And if you got somebody on the left that doesn't believe that, then the moment you set foot in the United States, you can be living in Oaxaca, Mexico, and come up here illegally, and you take 1 inch inside the United States, and the left says, oh, you're eligible for DEI, for historical racism and oppression toward your people in the United States. And you want to say, well, he was never in the United States. He just was here a nanosecond ago. But I think that's going to stop, because if it doesn't stop, we know where it is, the suicide of the West. Yeah. So, and I know that I was at a Christian bookstore not long. That is a lot of Christian bookstores carry your books, don't they? I've seen that.
Yeah. I'm surprised these books, which are really a trilogy, Sword and Scimitar, Defenders of the West, and now the Two Swords of Christ, are, the other day they were in the bestseller early Christian history Amazon list. They were in the top 5, 1, 4, and 5. So that's great.
Are they all published by Bombardier or just 2?
Bombardier is Defenders of the West, and the new one, the Two Swords of Christ, and the Sword and Scimitar was Da Capo, Hachette.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you should try to, that would be a good thing, Ray, if you could get them in a box set, as a trilogy, volume 1, 2, and 3.
That would be nice.
Yeah, a lot of authors do that.
Okay.
Donald Kagan wrote separately his 4-volume history of the Peloponnesian War. Then Cornell Press reissued it as a box set. That would be good. Anyway, we're going to leave now. Ray Ibrahim, Two Swords of Christ. It's out. Former student of mine, but also companion and friend over the last 3 decades. And what's final comment? What are you working on now? What's the next project?
Thanks very much, Victor. I'm right now trying to recover, but as far as books go, but I think I'm actually considering writing a book that, and this is a lot of this comes from people reacting to these books, but it would be sort of lessons for today from these books, from this long history, and sort of an attempt to articulate and reclaim muscular Christianity as it was understood back then, and which is now, of course, under extreme, attack. Christianity today is, of course, just the most emasculated religion. I call it doormat Christianity for a lot of denominations anyway. So I just want to, recapture that spirit, rearticulate it, show the theological underpinnings behind it, because there's a lot, like the Two Swords verse that I mentioned that most people don't understand, and try to see, how it can be applied to modern Christians so they stop being doormats.
Yeah, for students to get a more disinterested and fair view of the Crusades or the fall of Constantinople. Yes, absolutely. Well, anybody, thank you very much. This is Victor Davis Hanson, in his own words, the show, and our guest has been Raymond Ibrahim, and we're going to finish, and we'll see you in a few days. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Daily Signal. Please like, share, and subscribe to be notified for more content like this. You can also check out my own website at victorhanson.com and subscribe for exclusive features in addition.